Well, I will start by welcoming everybody to Frankston City Libraries as I'm getting a few more people out of the wait room. We absolutely love that you've been able to join us today at Frankston City Libraries for our Frank Talk with Christian White, who has been lovely, so great to join us. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which Frankston City Libraries operates, the Bunurong people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. So we are lucky enough to have Christian with us today. We love him at Frankston City Libraries, as more than aware. We, of course, love his The Nowhere Child, which I don't know if that's the right way around or mirrored when you see me.
No, that works.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And The Wife and the Widow. And, of course, his novella, Second Skin, which is currently exclusive on Audible. So I will hand over to Christian. What we are going to do, depending on how many people we end up with in the chat, we may unmute everybody at the end and we can have a little bit of a conversation. But we've also got the group chat. So if you do have a question for Christian as we go along, please type it into the group chat because I'll be able to facilitate those towards the end. But take it away, Christian.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. Now, this is my first virtual. Oh God, I just appeared very large.
Sorry, I just spotlighted you.
No, that's good. I was doing this. I've been, Zooming like everyone else with friends and family, and I've started to just minimize myself because I just look at myself and go, oh God, I look very red. I look sort of suntanned. Anyway, this is my first first virtual talk. So I apologize in advance if I waffle too much or if I, get distracted or anything. One more thing I'll say about my own appearance. I recently cut my own hair, because we're locked down, and I do realize their hairdressers are open, but I kind of, I don't know, I kind of wanted to do it. So it actually looks sort of halfway decent here, but if you could see it in real life, it's sort of, there's a big bald patch here, and it's really long at the back, kind of like an 80s businessman. So that's something else. So I guess I'll start. Basically, what I'm going to do is waffle for 20 odd minutes, and then we'll open it to questions. Hope to God you have some questions, because then I can kind of redeem myself from all the waffling. If you don't, I will just continue to waffle, which is fine. If you get bored, you can just kind of open Netflix in another part of your screen and watch something. But yeah, I guess I'll start by just talking about a little bit about how COVID has affected me. And, it's affected everyone, obviously, in really dramatic ways. We've got friends who own businesses who've had to fire people and all this sort of stuff. It's been pretty chaotic. But yeah, I guess now I'm finding it sort of not that different from my ordinary life, I suppose. I'm lucky enough to work from home, so that really hasn't changed. But yeah, I don't know. It's a very weird, really weird time to be alive and to be experiencing, and I'm really taking care to take mental pictures, of little moments that that sort of highlight what we're going through, and this is one of them. Like doing a library talk virtually, it's just such a strange. I don't know. It's just an odd thing, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, I think. So there's that. Okay, I'll buzz through my story about how I came to be a writer and all that rubbish. Ever since I was, a little kid, I sort of wanted to be a writer. It was always my kind of dream. When I was really little, I would, write stories and go for these long walks with my mum and make up stories as we went and everything. But it wasn't until high school that I thought, maybe I'll try to make a living out of this. I remember my teacher, Chris Bailey at Mornington High, he read out one of my stories, and I don't know, it was just this incredible feeling. And I sort of thought, oh yeah, I could, I want to chase this feeling. Maybe I could do it, for a living. So I set myself this goal. This goal, which was, I was about 17 at the time, 16 or 17. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to try to be a famous fabulous published writer, but I've got to become one by the age of 25. That seems really, really old to me. You know, back then it was like, that's such a long way away. I'll set myself that goal. You know, if I get to 25 and I haven't, you know, become this fabulous, world famous published writer, then I'll give up and I'll go back to school and I'll find a backup career, something like that. And then I got to 25 and this sort of bizarre thing happened where I wasn't yet a fabulous published, you know, wonderful best-selling author. So I adjusted it a little bit. I said, if I get to 30 years old and I'm not a fantastic published author, then I'll go and get a backup. But and of course that came and went as well. When I did get my first book published, I was 37. So all my deadlines are just, you know, way in the past. I'm 39 now. But I think what happened is somewhere past my 30th birthday, I kind of made this decision to I guess, you know, write for the love of writing rather than to try to be a writer. You know, I thought if I can do that, even if I'm working, you know, casual jobs for the rest of my life, as long as I keep writing on the side, then that will fulfill this, it'll scratch this itch, you know. I've talked about this before, this vision I had, this very clear vision of myself when I was in my 90s and I had just died and my grandkids were around and they were coming in and cleaning out my assisted living unit, and they find a sort of a drawer which they open like this, and inside is this huge pile of unpublished manuscripts, you know. And I thought, if that's my fate, that's kind of cool, you know, like if that's what happens to me, so be it. And really, as soon as I kind of leaned into just doing it for the love of it is when, you know, when things started to change, I guess, for me. But it took me a long time to get there. In the meantime, I worked a crazy and eclectic list of day jobs. You know, it's sort of, writing is like sort of like a habit. Sorry, it's very distracting. I just turned and my wife is sitting right next to me, and she is looking at ovens, you know, because we're renovating, and her nose is about this far away from her screen. So I'll just quickly show, just to embarrass her. So sorry, I don't know why she's not listening intently. I don't know why this isn't super exciting for her. Anyway, I worked, where was I? Day jobs. I worked this huge list of really strange day jobs. You know, I picked apples for a while. I worked at a bottle shop for a million years. It was one in Mornington, the Thirsty Camel in Mornington. I worked at for forever. What else did I do? I drove a little food cart around a golf course selling sandwiches, believe it or not. I worked in a call center for Coca-Cola, where people would call me and yell at me if their product wasn't right. I was a waiter. I got fired after one shift as a waiter because I spilt a load of peas on a customer because I hadn't practiced carrying the plates. I also, you know, infamously now, I edited adult films for a while. So I edited porn for a while to make ends meet. And really it was all about, you know, really just about sort of facilitating this writing habit I had, like a drug habit. Where things sort of finally changed for me were, I entered, I'll start before that. I wrote, so the manuscript for The Nowhere Child, what would become The Nowhere Child, it was originally called Decay Theory, but everyone on the planet decided that was a terrible name, so it got renamed The Nowhere Child. When I started writing that, that kind of sparked from this this kind of heartbreaking conversation I was having with my nan. She turns 100 in June, believe it or not. But for the last kind of 10 years, she's got age dementia, so she's been losing her mind. There's a little bit sort of you know, there's less of her every time I see her, you know. And anyway, a couple of years before I wrote The Nowhere Child, I had this very heartbreaking conversation with her about, which I've had many times since with her, sort of about, you know, reminding her who I was and who my mum was and all that sort of stuff, because she doesn't remember me anymore. And I started to kind of obsess about memory. I got really into just the idea of memory and how memory works, and what I do. This is sort of what I do in life. I get fixated on these sort of subjects, and then I just researched the hell out of them. Well, now I can call it research. Now that I've made a living out of it, I can call it research. But at the time, it was just pure procrastination. And anyway, I was sort of, obsessed with this idea of memory. So I started reading different theories of how memory worked. And I came across this theory called decay theory, which is what the original manuscript was named after. And basically, decay theory suggests that our memories fade due to the passage of time, which seems super obvious, but when you unpack it a little bit, it goes on to say that so when we create a memory, we create this thing called a neurochemical trace, which is sort of like I've described it in the book. It's like a red string, a string that you sort of tug on to retrieve that memory. And if you don't retrieve that memory over time, the thread connecting it to our conscious brain will fray and break and eventually snap off completely. But the memory stays whole in our head, a full vivid memory, but we just don't have access to it anymore. And when I came across that theory, I kind of it blew my mind in a way, and I began to think, what if there's a memory somewhere in my head that is floating around, this whole memory, that if only I could access it, it would completely change who I think I am. I think our memories are so tied in and connected to our identity. And I started thinking about that, and then I very quickly thought, what if there's a step missing? I don't know how I jumped from there to here, but I basically started thinking, what if my parents weren't my parents? What if they were my kidnappers? What if they kidnapped me as a little kid and raised me as their own? What would that mean? And that's really where the Nowhere Child, where it all came from, really. So I had this kind of nugget of an idea with this hook of, what if someone found out they were kidnapped as a kid? And I didn't really know what to do with it. I knew it was a good idea, but I knew also that it could be done in a really generic way. I was worried about doing it in a boring way or anything like that. So I thought to kind of solve that problem, I thought I'd bring in what was another obsession of mine, which, if you've not read The Nowhere Child, this will make me sound like a psychopath. But another thing I was interested in is Pentecostal snake handling, which is it's a fringe religion, mostly in the American South, where people worship. It's a Pentecostal religion, but people worship by handling venomous snakes and scorpions, and they drink poison. All this really insane stuff that they do in real life. To the point where I pared back some of the more extreme practices because I was worried that no one would believe some of the stuff they actually do. So as soon as I sort of brought that in and I thought, okay, I've got this one idea. What if I was kidnapped as a kid? And the second part of the idea was, what if I was kidnapped from a snake handling cult in Kentucky? And basically that was where I sort of jumped off from. I entered a competition called the VPLAs, the Victoria Premier's Literary Awards, and I was lucky enough to win in 2017, which changed my life, honestly. All of a sudden, all these publishers who I was trying to brainstorm, how do I get my work in front of, were contacting me, emailing me all of a sudden, wanting to read my manuscript, and there was a bidding war, and it was insane. And I ended up getting a publishing deal, within a week, which was really just my life had done a complete 180. I'd finally achieved what I spent, nearly 20 years trying to achieve, which was becoming a bona fide writer and making a living out of it. So then that was sort of what propelled me, I guess, what got me into the business. And then with The Wife and the Widow, which was my second book, I had this completely different experience writing that. With the first book, I had a million years to write it. And really, I didn't think anyone would ever read it, except maybe some of my wife and maybe my mum. But with when The Nowhere Child came out, it was a bestseller and it was really well received. I had to write the follow-up, and writing The Wife and the Widow, I had really two things that I didn't have when writing The Nowhere Child, which was, an audience and a deadline, and that they were both terrifying and at times creatively crippling as well. It was a difficult time in a way. it's funny. I feel like an asshole saying it's a difficult time because really it's, what sort of a problem is it to have, oh, you've got to write your second book, boo-hoo, asshole. But it was a genuine I don't know, genuine stress. And I was sort of obsessing about, is it too similar to Nowhere Child? Is it not similar enough? And what I ended up doing was kind of leading into, there's probably a less pretentious way to say this, but my writing philosophy is to only write things that I would want to read myself. And as soon as I sort of kind of just leaned into that and put all those other voices away that were telling me that, like second book syndrome voices, as soon as I could put them at bay, I kind of just went for it, really. Then luckily that came out. I'm blowing through it. I'm blowing through my story to kind of get to question time. The second book came out. It was luckily well received, and now I'm working on my third proper book. But in the meantime, I've written a novella for Audible. We were talking about this before the meeting started, but Audible approached me and said, they're creating a whole load of content for Audible members. And they said, do you have any ideas for a novella? And I pitched them what was at the time a very half-assed, it was a paragraph in an email. I said, what about this? Because I'd had this idea sort of for many years about, something else I'm interested in is people with past life memories. I don't actually know if I believe it, but there's a lot of people, especially children, who have these weird memories that they claim are memories from a previous life. They've lived other lives before and then have been reincarnated, and they still remember those. They still have flashes of those memories from the previous life, and that was really interesting to me. So I thought, cool. What if someone what if there's this guy whose wife is dead, and then a little kid turns up and says, hey, I'm your wife reincarnated, and by the way, she was murdered. She didn't die the way you thought. So I thought, that's a cool little idea. But I really had nothing else beyond that. So I threw that in an email back to Audible, and they went for it. So I ended up writing Second Skin. I don't know if you guys are Audible members, but at the minute it's only available exclusively on Audible, but free for members. So you can go to audible.com and sign up and get it for free. But it will be coming out. The way the deal works is I retain the screen and print rights. So in minimum 18 months, it will be, which will be really cool. And I guess, I could also talk about my TV show and stuff like that. And I've just got a thing saying my internet connection is unstable. No, there it goes. I can also talk about, I've got a TV show and a movie and everything, but maybe I'll try to throw it to questions if anyone has any questions. And if not, I can go on and ramble about that sort of stuff. So does anyone have any questions? And I have no idea how I'm going to know if you've got questions, but I assume
I have just unmuted everyone, so unless they've muted themselves, they will now be unmuted, so we can hear you, so no swearing. If anyone has a question, I do have one from Andrea, who's what's your writing routine right now?
Yeah, well, now my writing routine now isn't that different from what it was before COVID. I usually, I have a certain word count I need to reach each day, and the word count will vary depending on what I'm working on and what draft. So if I'm working on a first draft of a novel, for example, I'll try to do 1,500 words a day. If I'm doing the second draft, I'll usually do a little bit more, because the second draft is once you've done the first draft, the first draft is it's sort of painful in a way. You've got to vomit out onto the page. You've got to get all your thoughts out in a way that's loosely coherent. So once you've got the first draft out, the second draft, I can usually get a lot more done per day. But I'm also a screenwriter. So at the minute I'm writing a feature film, a follow-up. I have a film called Relic, a horror film that was produced last year, and it will be coming out It comes out in June, actually, in America, but it'll come out in Australia not long after, but I'll keep you guys posted. But I'm writing a follow-up for that. So writing a screenplay is a bit different. So I'll have, usually I have a 10 or 20 page limit per day. But basically, I start the day with my limit, and I get up and make coffee. My most productive time is probably the half hour or an hour before my wife and dog get up. I have this little quiet moment where I sort of, have this really productive hour, and then they get up. My dog right now, actually, you can see her. She's right over there. She's alive. I guarantee you. I'll go and poke her soon so she gets up. So then I'll get up and take the dog for a walk, and I kind of potter. But really, I work really hard in the morning, and usually I stop. Usually at about 1 or 2 p.m. I'm beat, and I'll often stay at my computer. But I will. What will usually happen is, with the best of intentions, I will log onto YouTube, and I'll think, well, I'll do a bit of research, or I'll watch some interesting things which will spark some, which will inspire me, and then, because YouTube knows me so well, it'll come up and it'll say, a Bigfoot caught on trail cam, some dumb thing Trump has said. It just knows me so well, and it has 50 videos there that I just have to watch. So usually that's what so I'm very productive in the morning, but then I kind of slack off in the afternoons. And that was a difficult thing for me to do, because I spent so long. I spent 20 years writing on the side, which meant I would write at night and on the weekends, and at just little moments that I'd have to steal. When I first started writing full time, I kind of had this idea that, you've got to make it worth it. You've been given a gift. You get to do what you love now. You've got to sit down for 8 hours a day, 9 to 5, and write. It was a really, and that's what I tried to do, but I found very quickly that I've got, 3 or 4 hours writing a day is a really good day for me, and I get a lot done. Anything beyond that, I reach a point each day where I'll be writing one sentence, and it takes me, and I'll realize I've been half an hour on the last sentence, and I'll know just to get up and go for a walk and call it a day. Because what I've learned is, and this might be an excuse because I'm lazy, but what I've learned is that by getting up and just going for a walk, or playing a video game, or going and reading a book or anything, it does help you work. Often I'll be stuck on a problem, like a plot problem, where I'll just be feeling a bit, stale on a chapter I'm working on or something. And I'll just get up and leave and go and not even think about it. And then suddenly the answer will pop into my head. So I think, I do think that when you're a writer, that time counts as work, sort of. I try to say that anyway. I might just be I am very lazy as well, but I like to count it as work. Are these the questions in the chat, or were you?
They are, which I can keep facilitating if you like. It's up to you. Yeah,
that's great. That's brilliant.
So Kelly has asked, who has been your favourite character to write so far?
Oh, that's a very good question. I have two, I think. Probably my number one favorite was Abby in the hang on, I'm just going to close this chat because I'm so distracted by it. Close. Was Abby from The Wife and the Widow. She was this, I don't know how many of you have read the book, but she just speaks her mind, and she's extraordinarily strong and funny. I often find my characters are a lot funnier and wiser than I am, which is a weird thing, but that seems to be true. So I had a real great time writing her, and I just kind of felt like straight away I knew exactly who she was. Her first line of dialogue in the book is "motherfuckers," and because she's yelling at a bunch of crows that are coming down and pecking at her garbage, and I just thought, from that moment, I thought, oh, I know you so well for some reason, and she's an island local, and she's just she lives a really modest life. She's a supermarket. She works at a supermarket, and I don't know, I just really connected to her and had such a fun time writing her. And the other one is probably, there's a character in my novella called Second Skin. The character is she's a woman called Barb, and she's the mother of one of the central characters. And she's just kind of, I actually have three. I'm going to do one more after this. She's just kind of crass and wise in this kind of crass way, which I really enjoy. But okay, I'm going to switch it. My number one, sorry to jump around. My number one, actually, now that I think about it, is in The Nowhere Child, Molly, who is Sammy Went's mother, the little kid who goes missing. Molly, but when she's old, you only sort of meet her for one chapter in the present day, but she's just she's just awful. She's just such a horrible person, and really it's really fun to write horrible people because you kind of just get to kind of purge, you just got to get to purge. So I think that's it. I reserve the right to change my list.
I must say I agree with you on Barb. It's like she had no filter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I love that in a human being. She gets away with saying things that you would never get away with saying, or you would say it and then you'd obsess about it and feel guilty. But she just comes right out, and she delivers home truths, which I really like. Those sorts of characters in books, but also in real life. I sort of love women, people, often older women, who can say, "Here's a home truth. Here's what you're doing wrong." Which I really, I don't know. I really respect that.
Linda's also asked the question, who do you share your writing with for feedback?
Always my wife, she's a very, it can be dangerous to share your writing with someone who loves you, because there's the temptation, I think, for a lot of people to, pull your punches and say, just sort of tell the other person what they want to hear. It's perfect. You don't do anything. You're a genius. But luckily, Summer does not have that problem. She's very good at telling me what's working, but also very good at telling me what's not working and offering solutions. And you come across this in the TV world where some people are really good at giving notes, and other people just make you feel terrible about yourself. And Summer is one of the good people, and she delivers what is called, in the industry, it's called a shit sandwich, because what people do is they give you something good about it, and then something bad, and then something good. So you kind of feel like, oh, they liked it. That's a good thing. But in that middle, there's that's what's wrong, And depending on what stage of the work you're at, you often, the fillings of the sandwich can be quite big sometimes, and the pieces of bread quite narrow. But yeah, no, I always share my work with some, and now, she's usually the first, and my publisher now, my Australian publisher, I have an agent as well, and a lot of authors share their work with their agents first. But I have such a good relationship with Martin Hughes, his name is, from Affirm Publishing, that he's always the first one. Summer and he and my editor there, Ruby, they're the first ones who read it, and they read it when it's really bad. So I tell people this, and they think I'm being hard on myself, but I'm not. Like, my first drafts, and I think most authors' first drafts, are really bad. Like, they're really, really bad, genuinely terrible. But it's such an important part of the process to get, if you can get feedback at that early stage before you kind of make your work better, it just makes the whole process a lot cleaner and a lot more smooth. But that can be really hard to do. Sending off your work to anyone before you think it's ready or perfect is really, really tricky. I think that I wasted, I think, probably a decade of my life with that hang up. Before I sent my first book off, The Nowhere Child was the fifth manuscript that I wrote, and the second one I finished, and only the first one I sent off. And I spent so many years not sending stuff off because I was sort of convinced it had to be perfect. But it was also more than that. I've since looked back on that time and kind of done some, soul searching. And I think what it really was that this sort of, I would fantasize about being a writer. And as long as I didn't share my work with anyone, I could maintain that fantasy. But if I shared my work with someone and got rejected, then the fantasy was in peril. And I think that's such a dumb way to look at it, because of course, if you don't show your work to anyone, it'll never become a reality. But I think I was so attached to that fantasy that I wasted a very, very long time. So So I think sharing your work's really, really important. It's a really good habit. You know, Stephen King says this thing. He says, write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. And what he means is when you're writing your first draft, close the door. I mean, literally close the door, you know, shut out your distractions, but also close the door to the outside world. And it's really your time to write free of judgment, and you can fudge plot points and you can vomit onto the page, you know, but then when it comes time to open the door and let other voices in, it's such an important part of the process, but it's really, really hard. So I think if you're a writer, finding those people that you trust, who can give you honest feedback, who it's hopefully an egoless process, you know, someone who can tell you something without you getting defensive or without there being no other motives involved. I think that's such an important thing. A lot of people have writers groups, which I naively did not know was even a thing before, until I got published and started talking to people. People would say, "Oh, do you have a writers group?" But I sort of said, "What's a writer? What do you mean, like a book club?" No, a writers group. So I think having a writers group, I've never been in one, but I think that's a really, they sound like amazing places if you can find people. It's all about finding people you trust and who get it. You know, my wife's she's a storyteller as well. So she gets it. And, you know, she has this creative genius, but also knows, she also has that drive and understands the need and how fun it is to tell a story. So I think that's a big part of it as well. God knows if I answered your question. I think I did. Yeah, maybe a long time ago.
It's actually nice that you touched on writing groups and writing clubs, because down on the peninsula, as we are, it's sometimes hard to find that. It's often in Melbourne. But we actually now have Peninsula Writers Club. So Ria, the president, who's actually in this discussion right now, will be very happy that I've mentioned that.
Brilliant.
So that's a fantastic resource for budding and established authors. Now, I do have our next question from Sam, and that is, what is your favourite genre to read?
I think horror. I think horror is my favourite to read. I mean, it would be very, very close between horror and thriller. But I think, if I'm being honest, I read a lot more horror. And I'm sort of drawn to that a bit more. And I feel like horror, you can kind of read it, no matter what the occasion. If you're sitting by a pool in summer or by a fire in winter, there's something so cozy about horror, especially Stephen King, that I go back to again and again and again. But I do read really a broad range of genres. I read a lot of thrillers, and obviously I write thrillers, so I try to keep on top of those. And I read a lot to, I do endorsements. So one of the cool things about being published is people to send you books that haven't come out yet, for your little quote to put on the cover. So I read a lot of that, which is really cool. It keeps me up to date. But also I read a broad range as well. My favorite author probably is Stephen King, but a very, very close second is Haruki Murakami, who writes, it's really hard to pin down his genre. Some of it's magical realism, some of it's just this sort of romantic drama sort of stuff. It's really, really beautiful stuff. So I do read a whole range of things, and I also repeat read. And I don't know if a lot of people do this, but I read the same books over and over sometimes. I have certain books like The Beach by Alex Garland, which is a thriller written in the 90s. If anyone hasn't read it, just go and get it today. You won't be able to put it down. It's such an amazing book. So that's something I reread. I'm rereading a Murakami book at the minute. I reread It by Stephen King every couple of years. So it's sort of, I read a broad range. Yeah. But one day I'd like to write a horror. Second Skin, it sort of flirts with supernatural elements, but it's more of a, the central question isn't, it's sort of about, is this real? Is this really a supernatural thing, or is it something else? So it just straddles that line. But down the track, I would like to try my hand at a full-blown horror. I do think afterwards my career will plummet, and then I'll have to make a comeback with another thriller. But eventually, I think maybe book 6, it might be a horror. That's my tentative plan, is to write 5 books in the thriller genre, not including Second Skin. That's that's a novella, so I don't count that as a novel. And then maybe I'll try a horror, but we'll see what happens.
That actually leads us on to the next question from Linda, which is horror your usual movie writing genre? And do you know Jamie Blanks?
That's weird. I have met Jamie Blanks, but he's actually very close to my wife's family. So my wife's dad, he's passed away now. His name was Everett DeRoche, and he was a prolific screenwriter in the 70s and 80s and the 90s. He wrote a whole load of horror films like Patrick and Road Games and Long Weekend, and I believe Jamie Blanks directed the remake of Long Weekend. Did he? Yeah, some's nodding. So I think I met him. This not to bring it down, but I actually think I met him at Everett's funeral. But he's quite close. He's quite close friends of Summer's family. So yeah, and he seems absolutely lovely and very talented. So is a follow-up question. How do they know Jamie Blanks? Is it a
am I just unmuted Linda? That was
thank you.
Just unmuted you.
Hey Linda.
I only asked because not everyone goes for the horror genre, so it's a small community. So I thought I'd ask. He's my neighbour.
Oh, you're kidding! Of course.
He's teaching my son about movie making, and my son's learning editing. So he's
amazing.
He's been a great mentor. Yeah.
Oh wow! Well, say hi to him for me, and say hi for Summer. He knows Summer a lot better than he knows me. But yeah, that's such a small world.
It's cool. I love Australia. It's so small. It's so good. Thanks for reading it out.
Now, Linda, you also had another question for Christian about The Wife and the Widow. Would you like to ask that now?
Oh yeah, sure. It's very distinctive, the format, and I'm not going to give twists in such a way, but it's very distinctive in its format between the wife, the widow, the wife. How did you write it? Did you think to not trip yourself up that you wrote one and then the other, or?
I wrote.
It's quite tricky.
Yeah, it was really tricky. So with The Wife and the Widow, I wrote them like chronologically. So the wife, the widow, the wife, the widow, the wife, the widow. Simply because I had learned with The Nowhere Child, it goes between present day and the 90s, where so it follows the woman who thinks she's been kidnapped. It alternates between her as an adult and then the case of her kidnapping back in the 90s. And when I set out to do that, I did it for two reasons. The first reason was I knew for it to be interesting, I would want to explore the actual kidnapping. If you explored it all through her eyes, then she would just be looking into events that happened 30 years ago. So I knew it had to be a bit more dynamic than that. But really the real reason was I thought, I'm going to cheat. If I write, writing 180,000 words, 100,000 words, that's so much. But if I break it up, I only have to write 2 lots of 40,000 words, because I thought, it's a really good way to cheat it. But then what I realized very quickly was that it just makes everything so much more complicated, because when it's really not two separate stories. It's one whole story, and clues and plot points that you learn in one chapter feed directly into the next. So I sort of knew what I was getting into with The Wife and the Widow. So I from beginning I just wrote it as you read it, basically, like each little bit. There's a lot of moving around, especially after the first draft was written. Again, no spoilers, but there's a significant twist in there, and there was multiple ways and places that twist could have been revealed. So there was a lot of moving stuff around, and then going back and putting in clues and making it seem like I intended that the whole time. When my American publisher read it, she read it blind. She had no idea about the twist or anything. And one of her notes was like, you can go back and load it up with clues, because she said there's no one's going to get this twist, so you can load it up with clues. So when you read it, if you read it a second time, it's so obvious, knowing, with the knowledge you have after the first read. And it's funny because with Second Skin I did it's alternating chapters as well. It goes between the husband of a widower, basically, this man whose wife dies under mysterious circumstances, and then the mother of this little girl who claims to be the wife reincarnated. So you see these different, really two different worlds. But with book 3, which I am also working on, it hasn't got a title yet, but it's just one perspective the whole way through. So because it is, I think I really love alternating chapters, but at the same time, it is so tricky to write. And I just sort of want to have one, I just want to try a novel where I just write a story from beginning to end and follow one main character. So that has been really fun and quite refreshing in a way.
Cool, thanks.
Oh, no worries.
Which Kelly has actually asked, can you tell us anything about that third novel?
Yeah, actually, I'm really excited. It's set so far. It might change, but it's set in the 80s, and it explores. I was talking about earlier how I was obsessed with snake handling and memory and all this sort of stuff. This explores one of the things I'm deeply obsessed with, which is satanic panic. And satanic panic is during the 80s and 90s, especially in America. It's set in Australia, but it did bleed over to us. Satanic panic was the term given to this kind of phenomenon where all of a sudden there was this crazy amount of panic and all these stories about satanic cults and kids getting murdered and tortured, and this underground satanic cults, and it all ended up being false. It began really, arguably began, I think it was in 1981 or 82, a book came out, a memoir called Michelle Remembers. And it was this little girl who, she was a woman, but she had gone under hypnosis and recalled these events from childhood. And she said that, it's a pretty interesting book. I recommend anyone read it, but read it knowing the full story. So her memories told her that she was abused as a child by Satan worshipping cults and all this kind of crazy stuff. And the psychologist who hypnotized her went on to become this, so-called expert. He would testify at trials and things like this. And these people who ran a childcare home, a childcare center, were accused and went on trial and got convicted. Anyway, it all ended up being false. It was all mass panic. There's nothing to support it. It was this strange phenomenon that just kind of came and went. And if you research it, there's all these amazing, kind of hilarious videos from the 80s and 90s about, news reports about these satanic cults and everything. So really, it's exploring that, and it's sort of a crime book where you're not sure if the crime actually happens, or if it sort of centers around this teacher who's on school holidays. He's got plenty of time on his hand. He lives in a little suburban street, and he just kind of becomes obsessed with this and starts to draw conclusions that may or may not be real about a kid who goes missing in a neighboring town, who he kind of thinks he's got it figured out, and it kind of goes down this road, and it explores that phenomenon, satanic panic. And it's been really, really fun to work on so far. It's really, I wrote out a really detailed plan and sent it to my publisher, kind of with my heart in my throat, because maybe they're really honest, maybe they'll hate it. And my publisher, Martin, called me and he just got it straight away. So and he's been really helpful and coming up with some really cool ideas. So I cannot wait to show it. It's funny because, you do all these things and you're talking about the books that you've written, which is amazing, and you love it, but in your head, you're just thinking about the book you're writing. So I love when people ask me about this, and I won't say any more because I'll spoil it, but I'm looking forward to getting it out there. It won't be out until next year, but I'm looking forward to sharing it all.
Now, you did give us a bit of an insight as to where it might be set last time we spoke to you.
Yes, it's set on the Mornington Peninsula. So far, it's set in a fictional town, but a fictional suburb, but kind of wedged between. You'll know it straight away when you see it, but it might just flat out. I might just end up giving it a real. I usually write fictional towns just because I often end up playing with the geography. Like I have this vision of 2 streets that back onto a pine forest, and I want to draw inspiration from real places, but I want to change it a little bit. So it may or may not be it might have a fictional name, but definitely set on the Mornington Peninsula. And it might end up just being a suburb in Mornington. I'm going to draw a lot of inspiration from where I grew up in Mornington, which, you know, in the 90s was this kind of little suburban paradise, really. So a lot of it will be coming. There'll be a lot of familiar things for locals, definitely.
Awesome, because I know that's been the one comment from the Nowhere Child and the Wife and the Widow is some of those references to street names. And
yeah.
I know, I think it's in the Nowhere Child where you say wherever it was that they were, it was between Berkeley and Maine. And in my head, I was like, no, they intersect. Like it was,
yeah.
That's what I've loved.
I think locals see how unimaginative I am with names, because I just steal names off of whatever I'm near at that time. So yeah, you'll notice, and there's quite a few names of especially in the Nowhere Child, where I've just named characters after my friends and stuff like that, just because nowadays, you know, coming up with character names, and I like a lot of characters, you know, I like a big cast of characters. Coming up with character names is really difficult, and with the Nowhere Child and the Wife and the Widow, I would do that by reading obituaries and just pulling names out of obituaries and kind of mixing them up a bit. But nowadays, I did one of these weird DNA 23andMe. It's called, like a DNA test where it tells you how much Neanderthal is in you and what your genealogy and stuff like that. But one of the features it gives you is your DNA relatives. So every month I get a list of people who are sort of 5th and 6th cousins, and I now just steal names from there. So it's a very small pool. So I've got to I'm running out, really.
Now, Sam has also asked, what is the hardest part of the writing process for you?
That's a really good question. The hardest part is I think the hardest part is showing people after my first draft. You know, I love the process of writing. I really, really enjoy it. You know, I love the craft. I love structure. I love everything about it. I love doing it so much. So, you know, I've been lucky. I don't really get, I don't tend to get writer's block or anything like that. I do a lot of planning. And if I start to feel blocked up, I'll kind of go for walks and stuff. It's not a huge problem. Excuse me. But the hardest thing for me is showing people my work, but showing them cold. So once you've shown them a first draft, you know, the next few drafts is fine because they know what to expect, but showing someone cold is always really scary. You know, usually I'll show some and she'll sort of put it on the Kindle or the iPad or something, and she'll be reading it, just sitting on the couch reading it, and I will watch her. It must annoy the hell out of her because I want to see and I want to know where she's up to. And when she leaves the room, I'll go and check where she's up to and all that sort of stuff. And you panic. I don't know why. The worst case scenario is they hate it. It's weird. And then when you send it off to your publishers, there's this weight. And, you know, if they don't get back to you the next day, you start assuming they hate it. And, oh, wow, they're going to try to get out of the contract. My career is going to fail. It's all downhill. But, you know, no one's ever told me they hate, you know, it's crazy. It's irrational, but that's definitely the hardest part of the process is getting it out. And that's what I was sort of talking about earlier. You know, that's what I don't know. I wasted years and years because of that. I had that weird fear. You know, it was really helpful overcoming that because it sounds like there's some writers among you. A really helpful thing that I used, a technique to get over that fear, was I started to enter writing competitions, which I don't know why, but I had this very naive kind of thought about writing competitions where I thought, I don't know, I just had this idea that no one would actually read them, or someone would read the first page and throw it away. I don't know why I thought that, because I've since learned they're so important. You know, if you get shortlisted or win, it's a springboard to getting published. It makes the whole process so much more, so much easier. But even if you don't, it's this really great exercise of getting your work out there, and showing other people and getting into the habit, because it never gets easier. You know, when reviews come out, I try not to read them, and I don't go to Goodreads or anything anymore. But every now and then you'll read 25 good ones and one bad one, and you just get fixated on the bad one. You know, it stays with you for days. So I think that's the hardest part is showing other people for sure. Because until you do that, it can be the best thing in the world in your brain, you know, and you can think, oh, people are going to love this. It's going to be amazing. But until you get it out, you just don't really know how it's going to be received. So it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Cornelia has asked, do you have a connection to Caroline Springs? My sister lives there and was so excited to hear you mention it.
Yeah, I've never known anyone who's actually lived there, but my brother a long time ago lived in an estate very similar in Cranbourne. And I just remember getting lost. No matter, every time I'd go there, I got lost. It was this weird kind of rabbit warren, and it just kind of, for people overseas reading the book, it won't do this. But I think for people in Victoria, as soon as you hear Caroline Springs, it's such a vivid picture. So I kind of transplanted it there because I've been there. I can't remember why. I must have known someone. I went there a long time ago. I think I was picking someone up, or I can't quite remember. I've been there before, but I had that same feeling where it's like, it's just identical. Everything, identical house after identical house. So that was, that was why. But no personal connection. I actually would have named it after my brother's estate, but I could not remember the name of it. It was something to do with a fox, or I can't remember, but I probably would have named it after that.
So it was probably like Clear Waters or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'll mix in, Paul and Amanda have both asked a question around the naming of the book and the covers. So what process do you go through to choose a name for a book, and do you have any input into the covers?
Yeah, so with the titles, I came up with The Wife and the Widow from the really, really early on. Actually, before I even had the idea to do the chapter titles of The Wife, the Widow, I had the idea for it. Really early in the process, which is really unlike me. I'm really bad generally at coming up with titles. And with The Nowhere Child, that was it. So The Nowhere Child, as I said, was originally called Decay Theory, named after this theory that's kind of explored a little bit in the book, but doesn't have a huge amount to do with anything. And every single one, it's sold into 17 territories or something like that. So 17 countries around the world, and every single one of them had the note, we don't really like the title. So when every single person is telling you that, you kind of just have to listen to them. I'm sure if I had insisted, it might have been called Decay Theory, but from very early on, I thought, I'm going to let the professionals, I'm the writer, but they're the professionals. They know markets and all that sort of stuff. So they said Decay Theory wouldn't fly. They said it sounded like a bleak sci-fi. So we went back and forth with dozens of potential titles. One of them, which was my favorite at the time, was In the Dark. And I thought, oh my God, In the Dark is such a cool title. I wrote it down and I sent it off to everyone. And then I went back to listening to the podcast I was listening to, which was called In the Dark. I just completely stolen it. I plagiarized it. So I can't call it that. And then Julia Wisdom from HarperCollins in the UK, she ended up coming up with The Nowhere Child, and she sent it out, and it was on a list of maybe, 5 or 6 from her. And it just kind of felt right. It sort of started to sound right. And thank God it was called that and not Decay Theory, because I'm sure no one would have bought it if it was called Decay Theory. And then with the covers, you do get a say, but I think it's a tokenistic say. They send you a load of potential covers and they ask for your input. But I did get the sense that if I disagreed with them, they'd be like, these are the ones we like. You might like some of the others, but we'll still go with the ones we like. And I think that's important because, knowing, I look at the different covers of my books all over the world, and I see how, in some cases, how dramatically different they look. Like the French cover for The Nowhere Child is so, you could Google it. It's so pretty and kind of this pastel. It's quite beautiful. But it's different from the one in the UK, for example, which is real thrillery. So I think that there's a strong element of, you've just got to trust the people who know what they're doing. But I was also fortunate, I love the covers of all my books. With The Nowhere Child, I remember they sent me a PDF with a whole load of different covers saying, which one do you like? And I just loved every single one, because they were all, it's a nice lighting change. No, that's good. It's better. We have these smart lights that you use an app to change. So some's just getting the mood lighting just right. Yeah, I loved all the covers because I don't know, they just had the title on it and my name on it, and I still couldn't believe I was getting published. So I found it really, really hard to be objective. With the second book, The Wife and the Widow, there was a load of covers that went back and forth, but then the one we settled on was actually from an island in Tasmania that's, I think, accessible only by helicopter. There's a little lighthouse there. And when I saw that, we all, you know, we knew how beautiful it was. Originally, it was going to be I don't know how familiar you are, anyone is with Queenscliff, but there's this old abandoned ferry there, this ferry terminal, which inspired the one in the book. And originally we talked about that, taking photos of that and making that the cover, but that didn't feel right either. So yeah, really, there's a real science to covers. You know, there's all this research and colors and what colors people want and colors they don't want. But luckily someone else takes care of all of that. Again, I don't know if I answered your question. Maybe, possibly.
You totally did. And we might wrap it up there. It doesn't look like there's any more questions there. Cornelia did say that it was so true about Caroline Springs.
Oh, good.
The way to her sister's house.
Yeah, you get lost, right? Who knows?
But thank you so much, Christian, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. It was really cool. I don't think I ever need to leave the house to do one of these again. So it's fantastic.
Which, of course, I said, no way, you're still coming in for your book sign reopen. So now, of course, I've just got them on either side of my head there. The Wife and the Widow and The Nowhere Child are both available on our RB Digital app with your library's membership for downloading. And of course, you can also buy them from Robertson's Bookshop. And when we share this on our socials, we'll pop the link in for that. But thank you very much. Please, everybody, have a look at our What's On the website. We've got heaps of awesome authors coming up, just like Christian, and a couple of workshops. So we're still here during this closure, but please join me in virtually thanking Christian.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for listening to me waffle for an hour on a Thursday.
Hey, I can think of nothing better to do. So we've got lots of messages coming through thanking you and being generous with your time. So
thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Enjoy your day. Stay safe.
Thank you.